Good morning or afternoon or evening to all of you. My name is Christine Moorman. I'm one of the team members that's part of the Better Marketing for a Better World initiative, and also the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Marketing. So welcome to this Better Marketing for a Better World proseminar. This is the first in a series of seminars that our team, which includes Rajesh, Chandy, Geeta Johar, and John Roberts, will be running over the course of this year. I'm joined today with Rajesh Chandy from the London Business School, again, who's one of the leaders of this initiative, as well as a special guest, Ajay Kohli from Georgia Tech, who is, of course, a leader, a general research leader, but he's also an expert in the sales area. He's the former editor of the Journal of Marketing. Welcome to our team today, Ajay. So the three of us look forward to spending the next few hours with all of you. And what I would just like to do is put this proseminar in context for the broader Better Marketing for a Better World initiative, and then take you through the outline that you see here. So for those of you that are less familiar with the Better Marketing for a Better World initiative, the aim of that initiative is to build community and support the development and dissemination of knowledge on how marketing can improve lives, sustain livelihoods, strengthen societies, and benefit the world at large. And as part of that initiative, we felt that it was important to have an educational piece. And so this proseminar is our effort to help the community develop ideas, which we think is probably the biggest challenge in this area. So we wanted to take dead aim against that. So in terms of the way that we're going to organize our time, we have a fair amount of time together, which is nice because there's a lot to cover in this first proseminar. So the first part, we will step back and take some inspiration for this particular topic around better selling for a better world. We'll offer a little framework that we've devised, and that will take about an hour. In the second hour, we'll break out into our individual groups, and Ajay and Rajesh and I will each take a group, and John and Geeta will join. And we see that we also have a number of other distinguished scholars who are with us today who will also join those rooms. And the goal of those rooms is to basically process some of the ideas that many of you submitted. We received, I think, 50 ideas, maybe 100 in total, because 50 of you actually submitted ideas. So we've got a number of interesting ideas. One thing that, because this is our first proseminar, we realized only after we had you submit the ideas that we did not get your approval to actually talk about those in the second half. So if you are somebody who submitted an idea, but you would not like your idea publicly considered in that second hour, if you can just send the Wheeler Institute, who's in the chat, if you can just send them a private message now and say, if you cannot discuss my ideas, I would encourage you to go ahead and have your ideas discussed, because hopefully we'll develop further. But if there's some reason you don't want your ideas developed or discussed in that part of the proseminar, please feel free to let us know. And the third part, we're going to talk about a community effort where we will, and we'll describe this at the end, where you will, if you've submitted an idea, you will actually get an opportunity to be linked to somebody who will help you develop your idea further, somebody else who's actually submitted an idea. So we'll pair you up, and we'll talk about that process when we get to the very end of the seminar. So let's start with a poll, just to sort of see where all of you are, because there are a lot of ways to think about developing research ideas. And so we just wanted to see sort of where the group is. So when you think about developing your research ideas, do you get your ideas primarily from the literature, or talks that people give from fellow scholars, basically, from the popular press, which could include the business press, of course, from your own experiences in marketing, or maybe as a consumer, or from the field, meaning you do some kind of interaction or observation with the key actors. So where do your ideas come from? Okay, so actually there's a very interesting dispersion here. About a quarter of you mentioned from the literature, but the largest group was from the field, meaning observing and interacting with key actors, which you'll see from this proseminar is going to be something that we really encourage you to do. But there's a nice proportion of you that are either from popular press, from your own experiences, or from the field, which we think will be a very, very helpful thing. So let's just keep this in mind as we go forward. Okay, So one of the things that we talked about in the launch of the Better Marketing for a Better World special issue was the idea that if we could nest our research into a set of broader better world outcomes, that there would be opportunities. And one way to think about those broader goals is to think about these UN Sustainable Development Goals. They offer really a broad view of a number of areas where the world needs help and where we think marketing could offer some really important connections. So we just wanted to put these up here in terms of these goals because they involve often dependent variables that marketing could connect to in some way. So we think it's important to keep this in mind, and keep it in mind in particular because we think it represents opportunity. So we think about that in terms of why better marketing for a better world. One of the big motivations that we think is great for, especially for young scholars, and we know in this proseminar we actually have faculty, we have brand new assistant professors, we also have a lot of PhD students, but we think for all members of the community that better marketing for a better world is really a wide open domain, which means that there is a big opportunity for fresh contributions. And as a journal editor, I can tell you that one of the biggest challenges with research is to find a way to make a contribution. If you content analyze a lot of decision letters that get written, a big part of the challenge with research that's submitted is that it just doesn't make that incremental or hopefully even very innovative contribution to the literature. So we're looking we see BMBW as a lever for those fresh contributions. But even maybe more importantly is the idea that hopefully those contributions will also have this positive impact on the field and on the world and ultimately on ourselves. That I think for many people who work in this area, they have their own kind of self-transformation stories. I think they'll tell you that they have personally been changed by doing this kind of work, that interacting with the people that they've had the opportunity to see in the field or learn about or to help, basically improve their lives. It's really had a big difference for them. So one of the questions that we need to think about as a field, and that we've thought about in our special issue, and that we'll talk about today is, well, how do you actually go from, thinking about a better marketing for a better world to actually framing this in terms of a research problem? So one of the questions that we have 3 questions here, but let me just go through these with you, and then we'll see how these come up in our discussions. If you can all make sure that you do mute, that would be super helpful, just for background noise. So one of the questions is, you think about those sustainable development goals, or really whatever part of, the real world that you think you can better, why is this, asking yourself to think very deeply about why is this outcome important to marketing? How can marketing really connect with it? And so in this particular case, you're actually starting with, that real world outcome, and you're trying to find a way to connect marketing to it. You could then ask more specific questions like, well, how does marketing actually make this problem worse? Or as the third point notes, how can marketing provide a solution or an explanation for the problem that if marketing were to be used, it could unlock a kind of solution? So both of those are focused on the idea of solutions. Yeah, so if you kind of take those 2 points, and we talked about this in our first, in our earlier webinar, but for those of you that weren't there, I'll just repeat this because we think it's a nice way to build kind of the abstract set of pathways that could occur here. So one is to start with marketing, and then imagine some kind of better world outcome. So here you think about whether it's sales management, pricing, segmentation, advertising, all of those could be branding, all of those. The question is, can marketing make a difference to the world? Are there possible connections to make between marketing and those outcomes? On the other hand, you could start with the world's problems, which is really where I was coming from in the prior few slides. Start with the world's problems, and then imagine how marketing could improve those problems. So you get the inspiration from the world problems, and then you back yourself into marketing. Both of these are very legitimate ways to think about building research ideas. It's just a matter of sort of where you start. Ultimately, the idea is to connect the independent variable and the dependent variable, but it's a matter of sort of where the inspiration comes from. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over to Rajesh, who is going to jump in. Oh, actually, I'm going to talk about one final thing. Sorry about that, which is, since this session is on salesperson, sales management and personal selling, we thought it would be helpful, and we asked you to read the variable compensation and salesperson health paper from the special issue, the Better Marketing for a Better World special issue, because we thought it was an excellent paper in general, but it was also a perfect exemplar of the kind of research that we think can be really useful in this particular area. So as most of you know, this paper connects variable compensation to salesperson health, and it looks at how those health consequences actually become a cost to the financial performance of the firm. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that why we think this is so such a powerful idea. The first is that this is not a tangential area of marketing. So I'll just speak personally for myself as the editor. When this paper came in, I jumped up and down because I was so happy to see that the authors took on something that was so central to marketing and that could have such better world outcomes. And so that, I think, makes the paper even more important, because it's not just something sitting on the sideline of marketing. It is a kind of a core marketing activity, which is also why we picked Salesforce management and personal selling as the topic for this first session. Now, some of you are here because you're interested in selling. Some of you are here because you're interested in developing ideas. But we think that it's important to pick a topic that's central. So again, then going further, why does this work so well? Because they also pick something that's a very common marketing strategy for many companies. I think in the paper they may even have a percentage that they report, but it's many companies use variable compensation to motivate their sales force. And so what that points to is the opportunity to say, well, what are the costs associated with that? And that's what they do in the article. So if we connect then the string of the additional variables, what they show is they make this connection through stress, ultimately to mental and physical health. And then if you built out on the right side of that, you would see then basically that they look at the profitability and the impact on the firm, or basically the cost, the financial performance cost, because people miss work, they have sick days, they're burnt out, all of the things that you can imagine come from worrying about variable compensation. And then, of course, they offer some very nice moderators to show that it's not always the case, that depending on the resources that the person has, they're able to buffer that stress, whether it's social resources or their own personal experience as a salesperson. So I just wanted to just wave the flag on this paper because it is such a powerful context. It's such a logical and compelling set of connections to better world. And we may not all find things that are as central as this, but this we thought was a really a nice example of how you can do this kind of better marketing for a better world. So let me go ahead and turn it over to Rajesh, who's going to take us through a couple of the projects that you had a chance to read and really work to try to derive some of the underlying lessons that are associated with idea generation.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to see familiar faces, new friends, our Better Marketing, Better World community developing, growing. Chris has presented an overview, some context, a way of thinking about generating new ideas. What I wanted to do next is share essentially two stories. Two stories of PhD student projects. You've already, those of you who've read the articles in question, you're familiar with the research. So rather than talk about the research in the style of a paper discussion. What I'm going to do is share the idea generation process, what went into the idea generation process, because I happen to have first-hand knowledge of one of them, and I've asked lots of questions of the author of another. So these are both doctoral student projects. Especially since we have so many doctoral students today, and you represent the future of our field, I wanted to share two projects that doctoral students created, but they also illustrate something about the process of idea generation in light of the two things that Chris mentioned earlier about better marketing and especially better world outcomes. And the two things she mentioned were to our field, better world outcomes still represent an innovation. So they represent something new. Yeah? The second thing Chris mentioned is that better world outcomes can have an impact. By studying these, they can have an impact on ourselves, on the world, on our field. And these two examples illustrate, I believe, both of these. So let me first describe the outline I have in mind. So the three of us reflected on the process of idea generation, especially in contexts where impact is directly or indirectly a crucial outcome, and the context represents an innovation. And as we reflected, we said that generally these ideas, and some of you pointed out, they come from experiences. So experiences from the field, experiences from our backgrounds, from our lives, our past, our childhood, our more recent experience, and the set of opportunities that exist almost exogenously out there in the world. And the combination of those two create a certain motivation, and hopefully you'll see that in both of the examples. They create a certain motivation, but that motivation is often very vague. What is essential for an idea, an impactful idea, at least in our opinion, generally speaking, is immersion. We'll explain what that means. That's what leads to the inspiration this could be a big thing. This could make a difference. This could be a big idea. And that's not enough, though. There's a process. This is academic research, after all. So it's not just enough to say, variable X can have an impact on variable Y. There's a process of abstraction that also links figuring out what X and Y are is a process of abstraction. But then linking that to the literature, linking that to our understanding is a process of abstraction and formulation. But part of the joy, which you'll see, I hope, of working in this area is actually in the implementation. Now, some of you may do, although we didn't see too many examples of these in the ideas you suggested, but it may be implicit that some of you may do math models where you don't necessarily, no one put a gun and ask you to go to the field, like no one ever does. But in many cases, there's an active, creative element in the implementation that leads to the impact. So let me describe this process through these two examples. My first example involves this man, Rob Jensen, and the paper you've read on the South Indian fisheries market. Let me give you, it's a paper that certainly influenced my own thinking in this area because in so very many ways, it is a marketing paper. And so I'd hosted Rob Jensen a few years ago. So I peppered him with a million questions about how the idea came about, which is what I wanted to share with you. And Rob Jensen, you may know, has done some remarkable work. If you're interested in inspiration through the literature, his work is one that is worth pointing to. So Rob says, so I said, how did you get, I'm from Kerala, the setting of this particular study. When talking to him, he really knew Kerala. I was like, how did you get to know Kerala so well? He says, well, I've never been to India. I grew up in New York City. I grew up in a housing project in New York City, getting a first person in my family, if I recall, to go to college. I was in the PhD program. And at the end of my second year, there was around this time of the year, actually, there was a PhD and faculty gathering. Some of you are probably getting ready to go to these. Some of you have probably done this already, sort of departmental gathering of PhD students and faculty. And he says, during this gathering, one of the faculty members came up to me, and as is inevitable, said to me, so what do you plan to work on? So what year? He says, end of my second year. So what do you plan to work on for your dissertation? He says, I think I'll work on poverty because I grew up in poverty. I have a keen interest in poverty, and so on. So the faculty member in question said, where did you grow up? Oh, in New York City. And he says, well, to truly understand poverty, you have to understand poverty in all its dimensions. You have to immerse yourself. And the advisor said, I have contacts in India and I've been studying places in India. You should spend a few months in India trying to understand the domain that you're interested in. So Rob Jensen ended up in India. He was located in the southern city of Chennai in India. And those of you who know, in summer this was the next year, well, actually later that year, Chennai in general is a very hot place. It's a tropical location. It's hot. Rob says, after a few weeks in Chennai, I needed a break. So I decided I'd take a bit of a beach vacation. And he ended up on the beach in my home state, Kerala, which is on the west coast of India. Where the arrow is pointing. And while on the beach in Kerala, Jensen says the idea literally hit him in the head. Why? Because he was walking along this beach in Kerala, and he says a fisherman with a mobile phone in his hand was walking in the other direction, and he's a short guy, and he says, he had his elbow up on with the phone up, and his elbow literally hit me in the head. Yeah, and I said, that guy has a mobile phone. This is in late 1996 or so. He says, that guy has a mobile phone. None of my friends in New York City have a mobile phone. What is going on here? So he started talking to these fishermen, and it turns out they were sardine fishermen, and they said, yeah, everybody around here has a mobile phone because, and from the story, it turns out you want to know where the customers are. And the best way to do that at the moment is to call around the different markets and find out how many customers are in which market and who wants what, and whether they want mackerel after all, sardines after all. That's what led to this famous study on the Kerala fishermen. And this is a study that relates to a whole bunch of the Sustainable Development Goals that Chris was referring to. It relates to poverty. It relates to waste and diet. It relates to sardines, by the way, excellent source of omega-3s, potentially good health, good jobs. Life below water, all sorts of things, yeah. So Jensen, while he was still in Kerala, said, I'm going to recruit 5 RAs, he says. I'm going to recruit a bunch of RAs who themselves recruited others. And he went to 15 beach markets. And this is the famous table from the study, if you've read the paper. This is the famous table. The very right-hand column is the number of excess sellers. The middle column is the number of excess buyers. And the column to the left is price. And those of you who've looked at the table know that basically, if you have more buyers than sellers, prices are very high. If you have fewer buyers than sellers, prices are very low. For the identical commodity, for the identical fish, pretty much. Prices vary dramatically, all the way from zero, when there were no buyers and too many sellers, to I think it was 9.8, 9.8 in Kuilandi. So dramatic differences. This was the empirical fact he established while there. Okay. And then, now, he talked to his friends in some context of this, and said, mobile phones have already arrived in this part of southern Kerala. Are there parts of southern Kerala where mobiles have not yet arrived? And he said, if I can find out when the licenses will be issued and when the implementation will happen, I can pay people to show up at fish markets in those locations ahead of time and get the price dispersion to see, to verify if this was indeed, the process he just saw was indeed happening. Yeah. And he found out that it turns out in northern Kerala, where not many tourists go to, nowadays it's a kind of a hidden gem of India, of Kerala. It turned out mobile phones were yet to be introduced. So he was there in '96. So next year it'll be introduced. It'll be rolled out in northern Kerala. That's how he found out when mobiles were going to be introduced. And of course, they tracked the same behavior. And it's remarkable. Within a few months, fishermen, and really it was mostly almost entirely men, 80% close to had mobile phones, which is, if you've studied diffusion and takeoff and so on, you don't see these patterns of takeoff very often. This is clearly an aggressive takeoff period. I want you to keep another thing in mind. The x-axis here is time in weeks. Okay, and that is, it goes from 0 to 250 weeks. Keep that in mind. This is a PhD student. 250 weeks is what? A little less than 5 years? Let's just say this was not his PhD dissertation in the end. Yeah, it took a while. And it was a 4.5-year study. Not everyone has to do this, but this was the case here. And he paid these 5 people to go to the markets every single week and collect the data. And he said, even as a PhD student, I could afford that. And then he shows these differences of changes in fish marketing. Basically, mobiles arrive in period 1 in region 1, and suddenly a third of the fishermen decide they will not sell in their own market, which is where they used to sell. That's one. The first column is 100% of them used to sell in their local market, to about a third selling in other markets. So you see changes in, as he puts it, fish marketing. Yeah. And as a result, again, this is a famous pricing result. You see price volatility going down dramatically. And one of the things I love about this paper, always my co-authors, some of whom are here, know this. I wish I could write a paper where the entire story could just be pretty pictures like these, where you show before and after, and you have this beautiful series of curves that shows price dispersion, that is variability in prices dropped dramatically, right? So you don't need fancy regressions to show this, although he has those as well. And then waste as an outcome. Think about it. This is about pricing and fish marketing as the better marketing bit, yeah, and the role of technology in that. The outcome is reduced waste, and waste essentially goes down to 0. The entire job was to verify it was 0 week after week after week after week. Yeah? What you see here is that process in action. Something about his experience prompted him to behave, to want to study, in this case, poverty. as a better world, reduce poverty as a better world outcome. But that was not enough. That's a vague notion. He knew he was going to apply this in the context of economics and so on, but that's still, it's like saying, oh, I want to study, study how marketing makes a difference in reducing poverty. That's good, but that's not enough. You want to immerse yourself to go beyond that motivation. You may even know that there are new technologies, smartphones are happening now, other kinds of new technologies are happening now all around the world. That exists without your awareness or with your awareness. But the thing is, unless you've immersed yourself in the context, you really will not understand the source of that, the genuine inspiration that is much, much more focused. And the ability to abstract up, which is a whole different skill, which we need to build. As well as the implementation of making sure he had hired those people back then and kept in touch and ensured that they got paid on a weekly basis or whatever basis every year.
Rajesh, can I just add one thing on the figure, just going back, that, the story that you told about the fella at the cocktail party, that was the opportunity, and that Robert actually listened, and followed up on that was actually the spark that created the whole thing. And he could have easily ignored that.
This is so true. This is so true. And he would have been right in saying, frankly, I don't need to go all the way back to India to learn about poverty. I grew up in poor parts of New York. I could do my field work right there and immerse myself. And he would have been right. Yeah. But regardless, that taking up that opportunity is crucial. Or he could have said, I've lived this stuff. I don't need to go all the way to India to learn this stuff. Absolutely right. Yeah. Because it also helps go beyond your own context, which helps with the abstraction point. Right?
And that actually leads to one question I had about so how did he go from the cell phone to thinking about markets and price dispersion? Did he tell you any part of that story? What was, because that's part of the connection to the literature.
Yeah,
right?
No, he had what he said to me was he'd just taken qualifying exams and so on, and this idea of the law of one price, which is what he tests. The idea that, if frictions go away, then prices will converge. No one had ever tested that. And so he made the connection between papers he'd read and what was happening but there could have been many others. He's subsequently written several other papers, one on boat building and innovation in boat building among the fishermen he met. Yeah, that was published like last year or 2 years ago. So it's been that trip led to like 5 or 6 top econ journal publications, all on marketing as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. My second favorite example, and this is someone some of you know, is my former PhD student and now professor at UT Austin, Stephen Anderson. So Stephen grew up in Canada. He'd worked in a tech company, so he was convinced he wanted to study technology and marketing strategy. And he had done a year at LBS, a year in Minnesota, and around that time, at the end of his first year, I had a research assistant, who was a student at LSE, amazing guy. I learned about, I won't get into details on him, but his father was a tailor in southern India, and he told me about the business that his father ran, and marketing and product innovation, which was what I was studying at the time, in the context of tailors in southern India, which I found mind-blowing. So I said to Stephen, you're looking for ideas. So he had this stuff on CEOs and marketing strategy and so on. I said, this could be exactly what Chris said. I've been doing innovation for a while, and you could no doubt contribute to that literature, but this could be a new thing that could be yours. You could own this whole entire part of this field. And that is to understand marketing among tiny businesses in emerging markets. And it links to something you've told me, and I'm not revealing anything confidential here. Stephen grew up in poverty, single mother, in a housing project in Canada, for example, and he'd had an interest in this area as well. And so, Stephen, I said, why don't you spend much of the summer in India? And again, this is in the same city, Chennai, in southern India, where he lived with my former research assistant's family, and went around asking small business owners about their marketing practices in southern India. Nothing ever came out of that particular project, I must say. We've recently been talking about that again. But Stephen's story, at least for me, is closer to home. It's a marketing story as well. To me, is an example that also illustrates, in a very complementary way, the same framework that we shared earlier. And Stephen's dissertation was the other paper that we had assigned to you, and that was published in Management Science in 2018. And Stephen's dissertation was set in Cape Town in South Africa. Now, so soon after Stephen came back to London from India, we were looking at some of the data, trying to make sense of it. We realized, causal inference is a problem. Whatever we could tell from the correlations that he had put together from the various surveys and interviews he did in India, we're not going to convince anybody. Even at that time, the field was moving strongly in the direction of showing causality in a rigorous manner. So we were cooking up all kinds of ideas. And well, Jensen did his mobile phone study. Could there be something else, some other exogenous shock? And then it occurred to us, a colleague at London Business School had created an NGO that was doing business skills training in different parts of the world. And the vision of this colleague was that high quality business skills training should not be the province of those who can afford to go to fancy MBA schools. That those in much more modest circumstances, very busy full-time entrepreneurs, for example, in emerging markets, should also have access to high-quality business education. And Michael Hay, who is Dean of our MBA program, among other things, was a passionate believer in this idea. And he had created this NGO in South Africa. And Stephen was looking for dissertation topics, and he was running a pilot project on business skills training in South Africa. So we said, why don't we go down to South Africa and see, what is the impact of marketing skills training? Rather than measure marketing practices, which is what we were doing, what if we could manipulate in a technical term, but what if we could design an intervention through Michael Hay and others that could change marketing practices and change mindsets among micro entrepreneurs. So let's see how good this program is. So this is us in South Africa, wandering around, trying to learn from the small business owners. We went to the pilot that they did. And it was amazing. So they recruited volunteers from local business schools, local business sort of consultants and others who would volunteer to teach basic business skills. So in this case, for example, basic marketing as a peer discussion format. Now, to us, this was basically exec ed being applied, executive education being applied to entrepreneurs in emerging markets. And then we met individuals who had graduated from this program. And this lady had a crucial role in all of the work that has come since, because she had taken a course in marketing. And she had, her first two employees were her uncle and her dad, both of whom were working for free for her, and then she then employed these four individuals, and a light bulb hit, which was they were also teaching a course on what they called how to manage money versus how to, what was the marketing course called? It was how to sell or something like that. Yeah. So selling and marketing versus finance and accounting. And in interviewing the people we met at the pilot, we realized there's something different going on here. Those in the finance group seem to be focused on efficiency. Those in the marketing group seem to be focused on growth. And this short intervention, 8 weeks, could actually change the thinking and the outcomes of this group of individuals who had been doing business for a while. So that was the sort of core insight. While I was in South Africa, I'll end this story and link it back to everything else, and we'll apply this some of these ideas to our own context. But it's important I mention another sort of happy accident. While we were in South Africa, a friend of ours said, "You know, there's this guy from the World Bank. He's here for a conference, and he's done work in this area as well. You might wish to talk to him. Maybe he's interested." And we knew his work because it was a failed business skills intervention in Bosnia. And so we got connected. I met Bilal at the lobby of the Westin Hotel, I still remember, in Cape Town. And he told us about how his intervention in Bosnia had failed. Was it Bosnia, Kosovo, somewhere in the Balkans, had failed. And we said, no, we plan to approach it differently. We'll do marketing versus finance. We'll do et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he said, well, I'd be interested. And we said, well, we need some money though. He said, well, World Bank has money. And within weeks, we had $100,000 from the World Bank to run the study. Turned out to, anyway, that's another story. Stephen moved with his little baby to South Africa. Stephen and Sophia, his wife, moved with Jude to South Africa. And we recruited 12 researchers, door to door. Stephen was in charge. Door to door, 10,000 firms they met. That was the target. In 10 weeks in these areas. We bought this car I'm proud of because this came out of this used Volkswagen came out of my research budget. It was a very cheap used car, which is what we used to travel around. The lady on the left is Christy Lazicki, who just graduated from Dartmouth at the time. I was looking for experience in the field. She was our field operations research person. She went on to the Kennedy School at Harvard afterwards, but amazing person who was our eyes and ears and feet on the ground. I have all kinds of stories about Christie's heroism. And Stephen and Tom are the CEO of the partner organization. Went door to door, as I mentioned. These are some of the clients. I love this one. He sells blocks, like concrete blocks. And he says, block by block, we build the nation. It always stuck with me because it's such a metaphor for the importance of small businesses and growth among small businesses. Every block he sells builds that nation. And you also realize, these things that look like one SDG, no poverty or dignified work or something, 50% of those in this township are unemployed. Of all adults in the township are unemployed. I mean, this is pre-COVID. 50% unemployment. Each job that the lady in the marketing pilot created is a job that probably would not have existed. It is dignity. That uniform provides identity. We haven't tested these, but these are ideas that sort of were palpable as we were, getting to know the place. This is another one. These are the locations where we hosted all of the classes. People showed up, amazing attendance rates. It's a whole other conversation around all of that. This is probably one of the most emotional days of my life. Certainly the most emotional graduation ceremony. We called it a graduation ceremony, partly because we wanted, this is for each cohort, those in the marketing group and those in the finance group, we brought them together so that there was a sense of connection with us, because we were going to go back to them constantly with lots of detailed questions throughout the period of the 18-month study. So to build that relationship and to sort of have a good time, actually, we brought everyone together, and we didn't know how many people would show up. We'd rented this hall in a hotel, and people kept coming and coming and coming with their, not only themselves, their families, their grandmas, in their, fancy outfits. In this case, the gentleman is the person who took the class, came with his wife. One of them, and they told stories about what a difference it had made. I mean, speaking of impact, even if nothing had happened, we hadn't even measured anything, it would have been fine in some ways. Stephen needed a dissertation to be done, but nevertheless, the impact on us was just profound. So many people showed up that Stephen couldn't even attend to the festivities that he had organized. He was busy making sandwiches for everybody, because they expected, we promised them lunch in an attempt to lure people into the graduation. Turned out we didn't need to bribe them after all, but we did still need to offer them lunch. This gentleman, and I'll end with this, he told us it was the first graduation he'd ever had. And he stitched, he's a tailor, he stitched the suit for this graduation. I mean, that's what really, affects you. Where you go, the idea you cooked up, while sitting around thinking of possibilities, can potentially, and of course, it's not an idea we cooked up alone. Our field represents that idea. The importance of marketing skills can have such a profound impact on an individual. I'll end with this. Of course, the statistics and everything else that are in the paper. I'll end with this because it is another illustration of how, yes, you can come with experience, but there are many aspects to our experience. And Stephen would probably have been just as impactful and successful if you'd gone into technology marketing in a high-tech company, which was part of his experience as well and part of his motivation. But immersion can help you see opportunities differently too. Be inspired in a certain way and allow you to abstract up and formulate ideas that are truly original and can be sometimes fundamental to the field because others have not immersed themselves. So the world, as Chris pointed out, is filled with ideas like these. And you might say, oh, well, in both those cases, they had to go to a developing country to see the power of these ideas. I will note this. One of the things that really affected me a few years ago is this book. If you haven't read it, if you're interested in that first SDG, no poverty, or any of these, frankly, you could end up with Geeta, I see your point. I'll come to that in just a second. This is a study of a book based on a longitudinal analysis of the, I think, 1-point-something million people in the United States who live on $2 a day or less. In the United States. Okay? How could that be? You should read the book, but I can tell you this. Marketing has a crucial role here because most of the time, they just do not know they're even eligible for all sorts of programs that could help them, give them a lift up to do other things. They don't even know. Yeah? So let me pause here. Geeta's gotten us started on lessons on idea generation. Thank you, Geeta. I see question one. Geeta, do you want to jump in and ask the question, or better than me reading it out?
Sure. So I was private chatting Rajesh, so I apologize to everyone else.
Oh, sorry.
So yes, I did have a couple of questions, and the first one was, I think this paper of Stephen and Rajesh is one of my all-time favorites. And the question I have is, it's amazing it all worked out, but there's such a huge upfront investment. How do you make that judgment call as to whether to move ahead or not, given this could be huge, high impact, high reward, but it's such high risk going in because you have no idea what the results are going to look like. So how do you make that call?
This is a great question, and that one that gives sleepless nights, to be honest, to Geeta. The answer is well, the primary answer is diversification. So with Stephen, he had two papers. At one under revised resubmitted management science and one at marketing science on CEOs and marketing and so on. He hasn't, it's still a work in progress, but we knew that if this failed, we could potentially go back to that. We also had a few other ideas. It's particularly pertinent now. Some of you know my PhD student, Iris Steenkamp, who's on the job market this year. Iris is doing super cool work, and then COVID happened. Yeah, she's still doing super cool work, and she's managed to pivot. And that's the other answer. If things don't quite work out, you've learned enough generally, and the work is original enough generally, that you're able to say, that didn't work, but we learned something. We could try something different. Is there an investment that could be lost? Absolutely. The only way to deal with that, in my opinion, is to also have a backup plan. Absolutely. Okay, let me, in the interest of time, move forward, and we'll come back to these, and it'd be good to get Ajay and Chris, and indeed I see Harish and others, and John and others here as well, who have a lot of experience in this area. It'd be good to get them involved. Let me sort of transition over to the second half, which is very much more applied, by reminding us of a few key points we discussed. One is the importance of immersion and inspiration. Important anyway for all work, but especially important, in our opinion, for better marketing, better world kinds of outcomes, for the two reasons that Chris mentioned. But then, when you go out in the field or immerse yourself, you realize, my God, the field is complicated. The world is complicated. The problem is complicated, and it cannot be, put into a 2x2 particularly easily. So this process of abstraction and hypothesis formulation is just as important, challenging, creatively challenging process as well. And then we may not get to this in great detail unless in our discussion, some of you wish to discuss this, the implementation and the impact creation elements. Yeah.
Rajesh, can I say one thing about going back to the three critical tasks? One of the things that is so important, especially for people who don't have experience in a particular marketing area. So let's say you don't have sales experience. Obviously, you have some experience as a customer watching salespeople. But one of the things that can happen in the immersion process is that you actually learn about all of the kind of detailed activities that, say, go into personal selling or sales management, things that you might not realize. Oh, there's an enormous amount of training that goes on, for example, or there's a huge amount of kind of intuition development that goes on. Whatever those categories are that are really the marketing categories. A big part of immersion is not just getting the inspiration for the big idea. That big idea can come from actually seeing all of the categories of marketing activity that may be sort of the fodder for the idea. And I think that's really important. And I know from my own work that's been the case. That I started in my dissertation, I started with looking at consumer research in the health area, but then as I sort of went and talked to people and studied it and looked in the field, et cetera, I realized, oh, there's this entire firm side that's out there that was going on with the creation of better nutrition in response to labels. So it was the immersion provides sort of the inspiration broadly, but also these categories of marketing activity or the actors and what they're doing that you can then abstract up to form your hypothesis from.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Categorization, yeah. And detail as well. Detail that lead to categorization, that's part of the abstract.
Thank you, Rajesh and Chris, for that lovely talks. As you've been listening to Rajesh and Chris, they've been talking about abstraction as being very, very important. And the one thing that I abstract away from Rajesh's two examples is that if you want to do impactful work, you have to go to India. If you don't go to India, and in particular to Kerala, you have no chance of coming up with any ideas about creating a better world. Just kidding.
Highly recommended.
Yeah. And if you can't make it to India, at least go to South Africa or travel abroad somewhere. Just don't sit in your offices. That's, I think, the message. And I will take that message to heart. Exactly. But more seriously, we're all here because we're interested in a better world. And I would like to, before I I've got just 2 slides to talk about. But before I do that, I would like to give a shout out to an organization, virtual organization called RRBM. It's Responsible Research in Business Management. And this organization has been for some years now pushing the idea of doing responsible research. And responsible research is defined as research that has an impact on the community and research that is credible. And that's exactly the kind of work that we are talking about doing. So if you haven't sort of gotten involved with this or aren't aware of it, I highly encourage you to take a look at that. They're doing some great work, and a lot of inspiration can come from just glancing through their position paper. Okay, so let me sort of moving along. Basically, Rajesh kind of talked about immersion and abstraction, and personal selling and sales management is crucial to every organization. A lot of money gets spent on it, and we can think about how might we connect personal selling and sales management to a better world. So if we go to the next slide, what we see is exactly that. Yeah. So when we think about personal selling and sales management, Rajesh and Chris were talking about how it's important to get into details and try and categorize from the details up into some sort of a hypothesis. So let's take, for example, selling. And you can think about selling at an individual level, at a team selling level. But what does selling involve? And so, and when you immerse yourself in the task of selling, you kind of realize that selling involves, pardon me, selling involves prospecting for customers. It involves qualifying leads. It involves pitching, demonstrating, negotiating, and so on. And if we want to identify good questions, we have to immerse ourselves in how exactly are these salespeople doing prospecting? How exactly do they do the qualification? What sort of goes on? And this kind of immersion can come from, as Chris pointed out, observation. It can come about from talking with the salespeople and finding out how they do it. It can come about by reading the literature as to how this is done, and so on. And as we become more informed about that activity, much like Rajesh's 2 examples, as we become more informed about that activity, it stimulates possible ideas that might have a connection with a better world. So let me just give you one example of how prospecting and qualifying might potentially lead to an idea that might link up to a better world. As some of you, and many of you are very experienced in the area here, but you will you will recognize that many salespeople are eternal optimists. They want to make a sales call on every possible customer. And you might say, well, that's a good thing because then they can sell more. But the problem, if you dig into the details, the problem is half the customers they call on never really buy. So what has happened? Well, what has happened is the salesperson has made a call on customers. Those customers are irate, they're unhappy, they wasted their time, and the salesperson wasted his or her time, and the company wasted the time for travel and the salesperson's time. So net net, it's a waste for the community and it's a waste for the salesperson. And if you can think about how one might get salespeople to target more appropriately, that might be a way to sort of reduce waste in the community as well as in organizations. Harish is here. He's done great work on something called working hard, working smart, and this would feed right into working smart rather than working hard to the benefit of not just the sales organization, but also the community at large. And the same thing, the lower box there, you can think about sales management as comprised of all those activities, but the richness really lies in how exactly are these activities being done and what might one do to do these activities in a way that helps the broader community. Those are the SDG goals on the right side, and as well as improve the quality of the activity itself. So let me just pause at that. This is just a framework that we might want to keep in mind as we think about generating ideas for research that can lead to better outcomes.